I didn't think a simple stop for gas could ruin my night. I didn't think it would make me feel small, exposed, like every eye in the world had been trained to find my flaws. I just wanted to fill the tank, pay, and go home. That was it, nothing more. It was late, past 10, and the station was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in the kind of way that makes your skin crawl without warning. I pulled my car to the pump and noticed the place felt older than it should, worn down by time and neglect. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and asphalt, the familiar sting of cold November air seeping in through the open doors. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. My jacket was folded neatly on the back seat, my badge tucked away in the wallet that rested in my purse. I wasn't in uniform. I didn't want to be noticed. Just a woman stopping for gas in the middle of the night. Then I saw him. A police cruiser rolled slowly past the station entrance. I barely glanced at it. I've seen cops pass gas stations dozens of times, but this one stopped. The headlights cut across the pumps, bright and deliberate. The car didn't just pass, it lingered, and then the door opened. He stepped out, tall, broad, confident. His uniform was crisp, his hand resting near the holster like a statement, not a gesture, not a warning, a declaration. His name tag read Officer Grant. He looked at me with something in his eyes I recognized immediately, not concern, not curiosity, suspicion. Evening, he said. Evening, officer, I replied, and that should have been enough, but it was. He walked closer, then closer still. What are you doing out here this late? I'm getting gas, I said, gesturing toward the pump. His eyes narrowed. Where are you headed? Home, I said. Where's home? A pause, a test, a trap. I felt the first twinge of panic in my chest. About 15 minutes from here, I said. He exhaled through his nose like he had already judged me. License and registration, no reason, no explanation, just an order. I handed over my license, keeping my movements slow, deliberate, too deliberate maybe because his gaze lingered longer than necessary. Is this your car? He asked. Yes. You own it? Yes. You sure? Yes, officer, I said, and that was all I could manage. He walked back to his cruiser with my license. And he didn't give it back. I tried to breathe slowly. Tried to ignore the tightening in my chest, the way my stomach seemed to fall through my feet. Every nerve in my body was screaming. I could feel the tension coiling in the space between us like an invisible wire. Minutes passed. The pump clicked off, my tank full, but I didn't move. My hands rested on the metal, cold and hard. Cars slowed, people watched. The world had paused just to witness me, waiting for me to falter. Finally, Grant returned. Step away from the vehicle. Why? I asked, my voice careful, trying to keep it steady. Step away from the vehicle, I obeyed, hands on the hood. The words were a hammer, each one a small blow to my dignity. I placed my palms flat on the icy metal, fingers spread, shoulders tense. I could hear murmurs from people nearby, see flashes from phones. I had been trained to instruct civilians during stops like this, but being on the other side was nothing I could have prepared for. Step your feet apart, he ordered. Wider. I did as I was told. His hands moved over my sides, efficient, invasive. The brief touch on my lower back made me flinch. Relax, he snapped. If you've got nothing to hide, there's no problem. I stared straight ahead, forcing my jaw tight. The humiliation burned. Every honking car, every glance from a stranger, every whisper in the night was a reminder of how little control I had. Another cruiser arrived. Two more officers joined. No introductions. No politeness. They looked at me like I was already guilty. Found anything? One of them asked. Not yet, Grant said, not yet. I felt tears prickle my eyes, anger mixing with fear. I thought about my daughter asleep at home. I thought about my mother, the warnings she gave me about the world. And I thought about the badge tucked away in my purse, the one I hadn't revealed. For now, I stayed silent. Grant stepped closer. His voice dropped. Dispatch says your registration is clean. Which means either you're very lucky or very good at hiding things. I closed my eyes. I realized that staying silent might not be a choice anymore. This night was about to get much worse. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as Grant circled me like a predator sizing up prey. The cold metal of the cruiser's hood bit into my palms, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to run, but I knew better. I stayed frozen. my voice caught in my throat whenever I tried to speak. Every glance from the officers around me felt like a judgment, every whisper from the strangers at the pumps a verdict. Step back from the car, Grant ordered. I obeyed slowly, my legs stiff, my stomach twisting. Turn around, he said. I did, careful not to make any sudden movements. The cuffs they hadn't yet put on me suddenly felt inevitable, though I had no idea why I, an innocent woman, had become the center of this spectacle. Grant's hand rested near his holster as he approached, his gaze cold. Hands behind your back, he said. My stomach sank. Are you serious? Hands behind your back, he repeated, sharper this time. I did as he commanded. The cuffs clicked around my wrists, the cold metal shocking against my skin. I swallowed hard, refusing to cry even as a wave of humiliation crashed over me. A few cars had slowed to watch, some drivers filming, some just staring. The humiliation was palpable, a weight pressing on my shoulders heavier than the metal biting into my wrists. Why am I being handcuffed? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Grant didn't answer immediately. Matching a description, he said finally. What description? I asked. He looked at me like my question was a joke. Someone fitting your appearance. Appearance? I repeated, voice rising. You're telling me I was handcuffed for what? Existing while black. One of the other officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing away. Grant didn't flinch, his eyes never left mine. Step toward the rear of the cruiser, he said. I obeyed, silent, furious, trapped. The other officers watched as if this were routine, as if none of them could intervene. I kept my head high even as I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. License and registration, he said again, reaching for my wallet. I handed it over carefully. His fingers brushed mine, and the sensation made me flinch. Another officer, younger, hovered nearby, unsure whether to look away or intervene. Pop the trunk, Grant said. I froze. I don't consent to a search, I said clearly. Pop the trunk, he repeated. Now, I hesitated for just a second, weighing the situation, then I pressed the button on my key fob. The trunk clicked open. I stood frozen, tense, watching as he rifled through my things, groceries, gym bags, a box of papers, and then he froze. Something gleamed in the fluorescent lights. He pulled out my folded jacket, the one I wore in uniform, and the badge attached to it caught the light. My name, my rank, Deputy Chief of Police. The air changed instantly. The murmuring crowd, the cameras, the flashing lights, it all seemed to hold its breath. Grant stared at the jacket, then at me. What the? I stepped forward, wrists still cuffed, and held his gaze. That, I said, is why this should have ended an hour ago. He opened his mouth, closed it again. His confidence, once so absolute, now flickered like a dying light. The older officer, the one who had been quiet until now, stepped forward and examined the jacket. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time all night. You work for the city? He asked. I do, I said evenly. Administration? He pressed. I shook my head slightly. Among other things, Grant's laugh this time sounded hollow. So what we're supposed to just know? I interrupted. You're supposed to check, you're supposed to verify, you're supposed to do your job before you humiliate someone in public. The older officer nodded toward Grant. We'll handle it. Grant looked at me, panic flickering across his features. If you're really who you say you are, why didn't you tell us? Because you didn't ask, I said softly. You decided. The silence that followed was heavy. The crowd leaned in, some whispering, some lowering their phones, realizing the story had just flipped entirely. Within minutes, internal affairs arrived in unmarked cars. The flashing lights of supervisors illuminated the gas station, commanding attention without a word. They didn't waste time. Two officers approached, badges visible but no words wasted on ceremony. I told them everything, every question, every order, every touch. I described the cuffs, the radio call, the public humiliation, the comments, the judgment. I told them exactly how it felt. Grant's face turned pale. The older officer looked uncomfortable. The other officers shuffled their feet, suddenly very aware that this wasn't a regular traffic stop anymore. After the statements, the cuffs were removed. My wrists were red and raw. I rubbed them slowly, deliberately, letting Grant see the marks, letting the witnesses see the truth in plain sight. Chief Morales is on the way, one IA officer said. We'll handle the documentation and there will be a review of this entire incident. I nodded. Good. Because nothing about tonight should be buried or forgotten. I gathered my things, slipped my jacket and ID from the trunk, and held the badge carefully in my hand. Officer Grant stared at it, his confidence shattered, unsure of how to face me now. The older officer spoke quietly. Are you okay? I'm standing, I said. That's enough for now. I looked back once at the gas station, the pumps, the cold asphalt, the strangers who had watched, some filming, some whispering. I had only stopped for gas. But I left with more than a full tank. I left with the certainty that power had shifted tonight and nothing and no one would ever forget it. The next morning, I woke to the sharp buzz of my phone. Notifications had exploded overnight: calls, texts, emails. Some were from my office, others from family, friends, and colleagues. And then there were the messages I didn't want to see. Strangers commenting on videos, sharing clips of me at the gas station, captions filled with assumptions, half-truths, and cruelty. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of it settle. The red marks on my wrists throbbed from yesterday, a physical reminder of everything I'd endured. But it wasn't just my body that hurt. It was the way the world had treated me, as a suspect, as a threat, as if my mere presence at a gas station made me guilty. The video footage had gone viral. I hadn't consented to being filmed, but the internet didn't care about consent. It cared about spectacle. I scrolled through the clips briefly, heart sinking. There I was, hands on the hood, eyes fixed straight ahead, lips pressed tight against humiliation. Only at the very end did the footage show the jacket, the badge, the revelation. But for those first 20 seconds, I was just me. Just a black woman alone at night under the flashing lights, at someone else's mercy. My daughter didn't deserve this. My mother didn't deserve this. I had to keep breathing, keep my hands steady, keep my mind from unraveling. When I arrived at the office, the energy was tense. Colleagues whispered in corners. Some avoided eye contact, unsure how to act. Others stared openly, curious, gossiping. I walked past them all without a word, my heels clicking against the floor, each step measured and controlled. Every whisper felt like a needle. In the meeting room, Chief Morales was waiting. His face was grim, tired from the early call, the long night, and the inevitable storm that would follow. You did exactly the right thing last night, he said quietly, but the fallout, it's going to be brutal. I know, I replied, voice steady but low, and I can handle it, I always do. He shook his head. This isn't just about handling it, this is about the narrative, the story that's out there, unverified, edited. People see the cuffs, the public humiliation, and your name doesn't even appear until the very end. You look powerless. I was powerless, I said simply. Until I was, he sighed. That's the problem. People don't see what happens after the reveal. They only see the first 20 seconds, and those 20 seconds, that's going to stick in their heads. The rest of the day was a blur of calls, interviews, internal briefings, and quiet meetings. I had to answer questions I hadn't expected to hear. Why were you alone at night? Why didn't you identify yourself sooner? How do you feel about Officer Grant? Each question felt like a tiny jab, a reminder that even when you are powerful, the world will still try to diminish you. By the afternoon, the office had begun circulating internal emails. Some expressed support, but many were concerned with optics, political risk, liability. I read them, nodded politely, and then threw the phone onto my desk. I refused to let the fear of perception dictate my actions. Not now, but at home, the weight hit differently. My daughter hugged me tight after school, her small arms barely circling my waist. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked softly, eyes wide. She didn't understand the full story. She didn't need to. But she had already absorbed enough to know something had changed. "I'm okay," I whispered, holding her close. "I'm okay because I'm safe and you're safe." But even as I said it, the memory of yesterday clawed at me, the cold metal against my wrists, the eyes of strangers, the judgment I couldn't escape. That night, I sat in the living room alone. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. I let the exhaustion hit me fully, body shaking slightly as I remembered every second of the stop. The embarrassment, the fear, the anger, the humiliation, and the sudden shocking reversal that had shifted the balance of power but not the emotional scars. I realized something then. The worst part wasn't the cuffs, it wasn't the questions. It wasn't even the videos online. The worst part was knowing that every day countless women, countless Black women were treated exactly this way, and without the badge, without the authority to reverse it, they had no escape. Tears rolled down my cheeks finally. Not just for me, for all of them, for every moment of fear they couldn't articulate, every second they had to swallow in silence. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a fire began to burn. It wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was purpose. I would make sure this night mattered. I would make sure the officers who humiliated me faced consequences. I would make sure the story was told in full, not the first 20 seconds, but every detail, every injustice. Because if I didn't, who would? And as I stared out the window into the quiet street, I knew one thing for certain: the battle was only beginning. The next week felt like moving through fog. Every step I took at the precinct carried the weight of yesterday's incident, the viral footage, and the whispers of those who didn't know or didn't care to see the whole story. Officers who had once nodded politely now avoided my gaze. Others stared openly, as if daring me to prove I belonged. Internal affairs had taken over the investigation, but the whispers didn't stop. Rumors spread faster than facts, and each one cut deeper than the last. She should have identified herself sooner. Was it really necessary to cuff her? Deputy chief, yes, but the word but lingered in every conversation like a blade hidden behind civility. I sat through briefing after briefing, answering questions I had already answered, reliving every detail. The younger officers looked nervous, their hands twitching near their holsters as if expecting something to explode. The veterans sat quietly, judgment in their eyes thinly veiled as concern. The hardest moments were the ones without cameras. When no one was watching, I could feel the weight of the injustice, the humiliation settle into my chest. It pressed down, heavy and constant, a reminder that power alone couldn't erase what had already happened. And yet I couldn't let it crush me, not now, not ever. Internal affairs demanded statements from everyone involved. I gave mine meticulously, every word measured, every fact checked. But the more I spoke, the more I realized how much resistance I would face, not just from those officers, but from the culture itself. People hated being held accountable. They hated having to confront the moments when their bias, their assumptions, or their complacency caused real harm. Officer Grant submitted his statement reluctantly. I didn't read it. I didn't want to see the self-justifications, the deflections, the attempts to rewrite the night to make himself look brave rather than cruel. But I heard through the grapevine that he had described me as tense, nervous, and uncooperative. The words should have enraged me, but instead I felt something colder, an icy understanding of how deeply ingrained this behavior was. Emails arrived from superiors, some supportive, some carefully worded, others passive-aggressive warnings about public perception and community trust. Each one was a reminder that even at my rank, even with my experience, even with the badge in my hand, the system could still try to crush me. Then came the meeting I had been dreading. Grant and a few of the other officers were called into the conference room. I sat outside, the door slightly ajar, listening. They spoke in low tones, their words clipped, their faces pale. Grant's voice was shaky when he said, "I didn't mean to. I don't care what you meant," another officer snapped. The footage, the chief, it's a disaster. Disaster. That word hit me harder than any insult or threat. In their minds, my humiliation, my courage, my authority, all of it was a problem. Not the abuse, not the assumptions, not the way they treated me, but me. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to storm in and unleash the fury I felt building in my chest. But I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I returned to my office, closed the door, and allowed myself a single quiet moment. The video still played in my mind, my hands on the hood, my wrists in cuffs, the flashing lights, the stares of strangers. My breath came shallow, my body tense, my mind racing through every what if. Then I thought about the next steps. Internal Affairs had the power to investigate. The chief had my back, but that wouldn't change the fear, the humiliation, or the assumptions that would follow me for years if I let them. No, I would make them accountable. Every officer who thought they could intimidate a black woman, even one wearing a badge, would learn the cost of their arrogance. And the lesson wouldn't be quiet or gentle, it would be undeniable. By the end of the day, I drafted a detailed plan, every piece of evidence cataloged. Every witness statement secured, every officer involved listed. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about making sure the narrative of fear and abuse didn't repeat itself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room again, staring out the window, thinking about the thin line between authority and power, between justice and perception. I knew the fight ahead would test me in ways I hadn't imagined. And I also knew this: the second twist was coming. Because once the system realizes someone refuses to be silenced, refuses to be humiliated, it fights back. Harder, and I would be ready. It hit me like a cold wave the morning I walked into the precinct. There was a memo posted on the internal bulletin board marked "Mandatory Meeting All Staff." Nothing about the topic, just the time, the place, and a subtle warning in the fine print: attendance required. By the time I arrived in the conference room, the space was filled. Officers I had worked alongside for years sat in rigid silence, eyes darting nervously as I entered. Even Grant was there, sitting stiffly at the edge of the table, face pale and unreadable. I could feel the tension in the room as a living thing pressing against me, weighing down my shoulders. Chief Morales stepped to the front, his face calm but grim. "I called this meeting to address the gas station incident," he began, "and to review the findings from internal affairs." I felt every eye turn toward me. Some looked curious, others anxious, and a few with something worse: resentment. I held their gazes evenly. I had faced fear before, I had faced grief before, but this was different. This was judgment masquerading as curiosity. A projector clicked on, displaying the footage from the night of the stop. The same footage that had gone viral, the same one everyone had seen. The first 20 seconds were damning, my hands on the hood, my tense posture, my eyes wide with controlled panic. Then came the reveal. The jacket, the badge, the deputy chief of police. Gasps spread across the room. Some officers whispered, some mouths hung open, some looked away, and then came the twist. Morales cleared his throat and motioned to the slide detailing Grant S. and the other officers' actions. "Internal Affairs found multiple violations," he said: excessive force, failure to follow procedure, public humiliation, bias in judgment. A murmur rose, quickly suppressed by his raised hand. However, the investigation also uncovered something unexpected. During the search and subsequent statements, emails and communications were found suggesting that this was not an isolated behavior by certain officers. There is a pattern, a culture of unchecked assumptions and bias within the department. I felt a chill. Grant swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "It means," Morales said slowly, "that there will be consequences, not just for those directly involved in the gas station stop, but for anyone who perpetuates this kind of behavior." The room fell silent. Even the murmurs of disbelief had stopped. Then Morales turned to me. "Deputy Chief, do you wish to make a statement?" I stood slowly, the room quiet enough to hear the faint creak of my shoes against the floor. My hands were still slightly raw, my wrists remembering the cold steel from that night, but my mind was clear, sharp, focused. "Yes," I said, "I want everyone here to understand something. What happened at that gas station was not about me personally. It was about power misused. It was about assumptions that put an innocent person in a position of fear, and it was about the culture that allows this behavior to continue unchecked." I paused, letting my words settle in the room. "You may think that badges protect you, that authority gives you the right to judge, to humiliate, to act without accountability. It doesn't, not anymore, not while I'm here." The room shifted. Some officers straightened, faces pale with fear or guilt. Others leaned forward, listening with the intensity of those who finally realize the consequences of their actions. I continued. The truth will be recorded. The reports, the video, the evidence, it will all be reviewed. And anyone found in violation of procedure, of justice, of respect for human dignity will face consequences. Not rumors, not whispers, not polite warnings, consequences. A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Grant's face had drained of color. The weight of his actions, combined with the viral footage and the IA findings, finally settled on him like a physical thing. And this is just the beginning, I said, my voice firm. Because every woman, every person who has ever been humiliated or dismissed because of assumptions deserves accountability. This department will change, and it starts with honesty, transparency, and courage. I stepped back, silence filled the room, the message had landed, the power dynamic had shifted permanently. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself a small exhale. The humiliation was gone, the fear was gone, the anger remained, but it was now tempered with purpose. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the final battle was ahead, but I would face it on my terms with every ounce of authority I had, because I wasn't just a deputy chief of police. I was someone who refused to be silenced, someone who refused to be humiliated without consequence, and the world would remember that. The day of the final review arrived, and the precinct felt different, heavier, quieter, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Officers filed into the room, some hesitant, others openly tense. Everyone knew this wasn't just about the gas station stop anymore. It was about culture, it was about accountability. It was about the message I had refused to let them forget. I walked in with my badge clipped to my jacket, standing taller than I had in years. The red marks on my wrists were long gone, but I could still feel the memory of the cuffs, the cold metal, the humiliation. It fueled me, sharpened me. Reminded me why I was here. Chief Morales nodded at me as I took my seat at the front of the room. Deputy Chief, he said quietly, this is your floor. I took a deep breath. The video was projected once more, the gas station lights, the patrol cars, my hands on the hood, but this time it ended differently. The reveal of my jacket, the badge, the authority, the power shift, every officer watching could feel it the moment when everything changed. I began to speak. What happened that night was a failure of judgment, of training, and of respect. But it's also an opportunity to show that accountability isn't just a word, it's action, it's consequences, it's courage. I let my gaze sweep across the room. Grant was there, pale, tense, every ounce of his confidence stripped away. Others avoided my eyes, but I knew they were listening. I didn't need them to like me, I needed them to understand. Effective immediately, I said, my voice steady, controlled, resonant. All officers involved in the gas station incident will face disciplinary action. Training will be mandatory, focusing on proper procedure, implicit bias, and community trust. Any officer found attempting to circumvent these policies in the future will face further consequences. A murmur rose, quickly silenced by my gaze. This isn't about punishment for its own sake. It's about accountability, about respect. About making sure the fear and humiliation I endured doesn't happen again to anyone else. Grant's shoulders sagged. The mask he had worn for years, the arrogance, the certainty, it was gone. I could see the fear, the regret, the realization that power is a responsibility, not a shield. Then I delivered the line I had been rehearsing in my mind for nights. We are officers of the law, but we are also human, and humanity demands that we act with fairness, with dignity, and with integrity. Anything less is unacceptable. The room was silent, not the nervous, tense silence of fear, but the heavy, reflective silence of understanding. For once, no one whispered, no one moved, no one looked away. They were listening, they were witnessing accountability in action. Later in the hallway, a young officer approached me quietly. Deputy Chief, thank you for showing us the right way. I nodded, do better than me always. When I finally left the precinct, the night air felt different. Cooler, yes, but also lighter. The traffic lights glowed like beacons, the hum of the city distant and steady. I slid into my car, hands resting on the steering wheel, reflecting on the journey from humiliation to authority, from fear to empowerment. I thought about every person who had ever been judged before being heard, who had been assumed guilty because of the color of their skin or the space they occupied. And I knew the story didn't end with me. It never would. But last night, the balance had shifted. Justice had been spoken not quietly, not politely, but loudly, decisively, and without compromise. I started the engine. The world stretched ahead, vast and unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the truth in my bones. I had not only survived humiliation, I had transformed it into power, into change. And as the city lights reflected on the windshield, I whispered to myself, more than a promise, more than a declaration, never again. Not for me, not for anyone. The engine hummed. I drove into the night, leaving behind the echoes of fear, the weight of injustice, and the shadow of the past. Ahead was authority reclaimed, dignity restored, and a message no one would forget.